When I was 14, I was interested in pagan witchcraft, and more specifically, the magic and spells element of this religion. I used to make spells the night before tests at school to keep me calm, and I always scored better when I practiced this. There was always a part of me that was interested in dark magic, but I knew not to delve into that world in case it hurt somebody else. That was until the 5th of March, 2008. It was a sunny day and I had one class left, PE. Our teacher wanted us to take a 3-mile run around the perimeter of the school. Soon after we set off, something was strange. Brandon and Taylor were running behind me. These two guys were the popular jocks of our year. They were on the teams for football, hockey, and would always be first and second in any track class. Although Taylor hadn't given me much trouble before, Brandon picked on me whenever he got a chance. Brandon and Taylor were whispering to each other, but I could not work out what they were saying. I had a bad feeling about the situation, so I sped up to try to get away from them. The next thing I knew, Taylor and Brandon were either side of me. Brandon said, "Not a bad pace for someone dweeb-like as you." Taylor laughed. I said nothing and tried to ignore them. Brandon pushed me into Taylor, and Taylor pushed me back towards Brandon. As Taylor pushed me, I slipped and fell onto Brandon's leg, accidentally taking Brandon down with me. "What do you think you're playing at?" Brandon shouted. Brandon got up and said, "Come on, Taylor." Brandon and Taylor sprinted off quickly, catching up with the front of the class. I cleaned the mud off my legs and just focused on getting this run over with. When I got back to the rest of the class, Coach was telling everyone about a track competition we could enter. I noticed Brandon and Taylor weren't there. I got back to the locker room and there was still no sign of them. I exhaled a large breath of relief. I opened my locker door and all of a sudden an arm came over my head and pulled my bag out of my locker. "Hey, dweeb," Brandon said. I turned round. Taylor is holding my bag, whilst Brandon is standing over me with a wild, sadistic smile. Brandon picked me up, and I shouted, "Put me down." At this point, most of the guys in the locker room were looking at what was going on. Taylor walked towards the showers, my bag still in hand. He put the temperature to the coldest setting and turned the shower on. Brandon put me down and pushed me into the shower. Taylor then threw my bag at me. Brandon, Taylor, and other spectators all stood around and laughed at me. Each time I would stand out from under the shower head, Brandon would kick me back into position. I've tried to block out all the details from my memory. After this ended, I sat on the floor in the shower block and waited for everyone to leave. I opened my bag and all my books and class notes were ruined. My eyes filled with tears, but within a second my emotions switched from upset and embarrassment to absolute rage. Once home, I collected a few items, including 10 grams of salt, 2 chicken legs, a small tank of petrol, and a matchbox. I told my mum that I had to go out to take some pictures in the woods for our photography class the next morning. When I got to the woods, I drew a circle and threw the salt in this circle. With Taylor's face strong in my mind, I chanted, "Never health, never wealth, only sickness shall prevail." When I finished, I drew a larger second circle and using a stick wrote Brandon inside. I placed the chicken legs in the middle of the second circle, poured petrol over them and lit a match. I threw the match at the circle and the chicken legs went up in flames. I smiled. The next day I had algebra with Brandon and Taylor. They sat next to each other at the back of the class. When I walked in the class, they smirked and both started to laugh. I was terrified of being humiliated, but also at what I had done the night before. I had never used dark magic before. Mr. Jones, my algebra teacher, instructed the class, "You have a surprise test to do today. This must be done in silence, otherwise you will be disqualified. You have 15 minutes to answer all the questions and your time starts now." Not even 1 minute into the test, I felt a paper ball being thrown at my head. I looked around and Brandon was pulling faces at me. I slammed my pen down and grunted in rage. I could hear Taylor and Brandon laughing. Mr. Jones looked at me and said, "Do you want to be disqualified?" "No, sir, but..." Before I could finish my sentence, there was a welching noise from the back of the classroom. Taylor was gagging and looked pale as a ghost. Brandon was looking at Taylor in fear and saying, "Cut it out, man." Next thing, Taylor had puked all over himself, his table and floor. He was still gagging at this point. Then all of a sudden, Brandon started screaming. Mr. Jones shouted, "Brandon, stop screaming. You are not helping the situation." "It's not that," Brandon said. Brandon pulled his trousers down and his legs looked like they were burning from the inside. Fumes came off his legs and his pale skin started to turn black. Brandon screamed. Taylor puked everywhere. Everyone in the class looked terrified, including myself, but on the inside I was delighted that the spell had worked. If only I had a bag of popcorn to enjoy the masterpiece that I created.